Hey, this is a great question. The question of other types of evidence that might confirm that man and dinosaurs lived together at the same time. In fact, there's been some recent stuff that's really kind of thrown a monkey wrench in the secular worldview. And it was actually discovered by secularists. Dr. Mary Schweitzer, I know Dr. Jack Horner, a number of these guys have worked on this. But with Dr. Schweitzer, they actually took a T-Rex femur and they had to break it in half to get it out of where they were actually getting it out from. And to fit it on a helicopter, they had to break it. They got it on this helicopter. They get it back to the lab, and they zoom up, and they were shocked because they saw some preserved red blood cells. And they were like, whoa, red blood cells don't last, millions of years at all. So finally, after their research, they started looking, and they said, well, I guess red blood cells really do last 65 million years. So that was kind of the mentality. But, red blood cells don't last long. In fact, people have been cracking open other T-Rex bones and other dinosaur bones. I know some creationists that cracked open a Triceratops horn, and they found soft tissue. And, this stuff is stretchy. It gives off an odor. The odds of something like that lasting millions of years is just outrageous. But a matter of thousands of years, yeah, we could see that. That actually makes a lot more sense. So that's just one piece of evidence right there that we're looking at that's just absolutely fascinating. When it comes to different types of evidence, I love to see some of the different rock layers and some of the different dinosaur bones that have been found in that. And, those are fascinating pieces of evidence. But here's what we need to understand about evidence. When we look at evidence, we're looking at it different than the way the world looks at evidence. You see, evidence is evidence. Evidence doesn't speak for itself. I've had a lot of people say, well, what is the evidence? Say, well, evidence doesn't actually speak. If it's speaking to you, go see a counselor. Something's wrong. What it is people have a worldview by which they look at evidence. So we're all looking at the same evidence. We're all looking at the same dinosaur bones. We're looking at the same DNA. We're looking at the same evidence. The difference is the interpretation of that evidence. See, me as a Christian, I want to start with the Word of God when I look at any piece of evidence. Start with the Word of God and use the way God is looking at the world and use that as my framework, because God's always right. So when I look at dinosaur bones or rock layers or whatever it might be, I want to start with the Word of God when I look at that evidence. But what's the world doing? The world has said no to God and His Word. And so basically they've elevated their own thoughts to look at that same evidence. That's actually a religion called humanism, where man's ideas have been elevated to supersede God and His Word. That is a different religion. And so that's the way the world is looking at it. Now there's a lot of forms of humanism, naturalism, atheism. In fact, I would go so far as to say all other religions that deviate from God and His Word one way or another have taken human ideas to elevate to supersede God and His Word. They're humanistic one way or another. And so what's happening is we're battling over the same evidence, but it's two different interpretations. When I'm looking at dinosaur soft tissue, I'm thinking in terms of the Bible. What they're doing is they're trying to reject the Bible, and they're trying to fit that in some way with the millions of years, which is why some of those researchers said, well, I guess this stuff really does last 65 million years. Even though they don't have a scientific basis for it, they've never been able to observe that. They've never been able to repeat that sort of thing. They hold that with a religious conviction, and it makes sense because it's their religion that is dictating the way that they're looking at that evidence. Yeah, there's an incredible amount of evidence of man and dinosaurs living together. Dragon accounts, those dragon legends, I think those are powerful evidence. The mentions of dragon and behemoth and leviathan, things like that in the Bible. I think those are powerful pieces of evidence. But we also find a lot of rock art or petroglyphs, these different things where, say, Native Americans or different people have actually etched out creatures right alongside other creatures that look very similar to what we call dinosaurs today. We see this here in North America. We see it in Europe. We see it in the Middle East. We see it in China. There's quite a bit of that. And, I can't give you a description of every single one of those. You can find a lot of these, on the website at Answers in Genesis. You can find them at a number of websites. Fact is, a number of creationists like to point these out, and a lot of the evolutionists like to try to come up with strange explanations to try to explain them away. One of my favorites is Bishop Bell over in northern England. There's a church there, and he's buried in the church, and there's a brassing that goes along the outside of his, and there's a number of animals etched in there. One of my favorites is there's a couple of dinosaurs. They look just like dinosaurs. I don't know what else you would call them, but it's just fascinating when you see that kind of stuff. So we see examples like that all over the place. Those are powerful pieces of evidence that show, hey, man and dinosaurs may not have been separated by millions of years. They might have actually lived side by side, and the dinosaurs have simply died out since that time. That's just one piece of evidence. There's plenty of others that we could talk about, but for time's sake, we'll stop there.